Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, your guide through shadows and secrets. Here, every teacup trembles with hidden truths and every smile may mask a crime. Settle in. The mystery is about to unfold. Imagine a snowy Christmas in a quaint English village where sharp-eyed Miss Marple spots a charming couple. But something's deadly wrong. She whispers, "He'll kill her soon." Days later, the wife vanishes, her husband claiming a sudden London trip. But Miss Marple uncovers chilling clues, deep footprints in the snow, a misplaced laundry basket, and a locked shed hiding horrors. As the village celebrates, she races against time to expose a cold-blooded murder before the Boxing Day bonfire burns the evidence. Will justice prevail in this festive nightmare? Dive into tale of deception and detection. Your pulse will race from the start. Chapter 1. The Chill of Foreboding. The winter sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a pale, watery glow across the snow-dusted cottages that lined the village's winding lanes. Frost sparkled on the hedgerows, and the air carried the sharp, clean scent of impending snow. In her modest parlor at Danemead Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles moving with the steady rhythm of a metronome. A ball of soft gray wool rested in her lap, and a fire crackled in the hearth. But her attention was not on the scarf taking shape beneath her fingers. Her keen eyes, bright and unclouded despite her years, were fixed on the world beyond the lace-curtained panes. It was the week before Christmas, and St. Mary Mead thrummed with the quiet excitement of the season. Children scampered through the snow, their laughter echoing like bells, while women bustled to and fro with baskets of holly and parcels wrapped in brown paper. Yet beneath the festive cheer, Miss Marple sensed a discord, a faint but unmistakable ripple in the village's placid surface. She had lived long enough to know that evil did not announce itself with fanfare. It crept in silently, cloaked in the ordinary. Her gaze settled on a couple passing along the lane. Mr. Reginald Hawthorne and his wife Clara. They were newcomers, having taken up residence in Rose Cottage only 3 months prior, and the village had yet to fully unravel their story. Reginald was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a handsome face that might have been charming were it not for the hardness in his jaw. His dark overcoat was impeccably tailored, and he walked with a measured stride, as if each step were calculated to convey authority. Clara, by contrast, seemed diminished beside him, her slight frame bundled in a faded green coat. Her auburn hair was tucked beneath a woolen scarf, and her eyes, wide and restless, darted about as though seeking escape. Miss Marple's needles paused. There was something in Reginald's manner that set her nerves on edge, a subtle wrongness she could not yet name. His arm was linked with Clara's, but the gesture felt possessive rather than affectionate, like a man staking claim to a prize. Clara's laughter, thin and forced, reached Miss Marple's ears as Reginald leaned down to speak, his voice low and sharp. Clara flinched almost imperceptibly, and Miss Marple's lips tightened. She had seen such flinches before, in the eyes of a maid dismissed for a broken dish, in the posture of a wife who knew her husband's temper too well. "He will kill her," Miss Marple murmured, her voice barely audible above the fire's crackle. The words startled even herself, for they came not from evidence but from instinct, honed by years of observing the quiet sins of St. Mary Mead. She set her knitting aside and leaned closer to the window. her breath fogging the glass. Reginald's smile as he nodded to a passing neighbor was too perfect, too practiced. It was the smile of a man who knew how to be seen, but not how to be known. Clara, clinging to his arm, glanced toward Danemead Cottage, and for a fleeting moment her eyes met Miss Marple's. There was a plea in them, or perhaps fear, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She thought of Mrs. Grayson, a vicar's wife from years past, whose husband had seemed so devoted until the day she was found at the bottom of the stairs, her neck broken. The village had called it an accident, but Miss Marple had noticed the way Mr. Grayson's hands trembled when he spoke of her, and the way his eyes avoided the staircase. No one had listened to her then, but she had been right. Now, as the hawthorns disappeared around the bend, Miss Marple resolved to watch them closely. She had no proof, no concrete reason to suspect Reginald Hawthorne of anything more than a cold demeanor. But proof, she knew, was merely the final piece of a puzzle whose shape she could already discern. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and moved to the tea tray where a pot sat cooling. As she poured herself a cup, her mind catalogued every detail. The way Reginald's coat had bulged slightly at the pocket, as if concealing something heavy. The way Clara's scarf had been tied too tightly as though to hide a mark. The way the snow behind them bore only one set of footprints, as if Clara's weight had been borne by another. The village clock chimed 4, its notes muffled by the snow. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts as sharp as the frost outside. Christmas was a time of joy, but it was also a time when secrets pressed down by the weight of festivity could fester unseen. She would attend the Christmas bazaar tomorrow, she decided, and observe the hawthorns among the crowd. People revealed themselves in company, their masks slipping in the glow of candlelight and the hum of carols. If Reginald Hawthorne was planning something sinister, Miss Marple would see it. And if Clara was in danger, as her instincts screamed, then Jane Marple would not rest until the truth was laid bare. Chapter 2. The Festive Facade. The village hall of St. Mary Mead glowed like a lantern against the deepening twilight, its windows spilling golden light onto the snow-covered lawn. Inside, the annual Christmas bazaar was in full swing, a whirl of color and chatter that transformed the modest space into a festive tableau. Holly wreaths adorned the walls, their red berries gleaming, while long tables sagged under the weight of mince pies, knitted scarves, and jars of homemade jam. The air was thick with the scents of mulled wine and pine, and a small choir in the corner sang, "O come, all ye faithful," with more enthusiasm than harmony. To an outsider, it was a scene of unblemished cheer, but Miss Jane Marple, seated near the tea stall with a cup of Earl Grey, knew that even the brightest gatherings could conceal shadows. She had arrived early, her best woolen shawl draped over her shoulders, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. The bazaar was the perfect place to observe the hawthorns, for people, she had long noted, revealed their true natures in crowds. A man might smile for his neighbors, but his eyes would betray him. A woman might laugh, but her hands would tell a different story. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, cataloging the villagers. Mrs. Bantry, resplendent in a crimson hat, haggling over a set of embroidered napkins, young doctor. Haydock, blushing as he bought a lavender sachet from a giggling schoolgirl. And the vicar, Mr. Clement, attempting to mediate a dispute over the tombola prizes. But her attention fixed on Reginald and Clara Hawthorne, who stood near the cake stall, their presence drawing curious glances from the villagers. Reginald was the picture of geniality, his dark hair slicked back, his smile as polished as the silver buttons on his coat. He chatted easily with Mrs. Price, the postmistress, his voice carrying a practiced warmth. "Oh, Clara's been a marvel with the decorations," he said, gesturing to his wife, who stood beside him, arranging fairy cakes on a platter. "She's got a knack for making things beautiful, haven't you, dear?" His hand rested lightly on Clara's shoulder, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tightened just for a moment before releasing her. Clara, pale and delicate in a gray dress that seemed too large for her frame, managed a smile. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly, but a few strands had escaped, curling against her neck like tendrils of ivy. Her hands, as she handed a cake to a customer, trembled slightly, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Clara's nervousness was not that of a woman unused to public gatherings. It was the agitation of someone under strain, someone who feared a misstep. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the details of the previous day. Reginald's calculated stride, Clara's fleeting, fearful glance, the single set of footprints in the snow. She had no doubt now. Something was terribly wrong in the Hawthorne household. The choir struck up "Silent Night," and the crowd's chatter softened, giving Miss Marple a moment to reflect. She had known couples like the Hawthornes before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond. There was Mr. and Mrs. Ellison years ago, whose marriage had seemed idyllic until Mr. Ellison's hunting accident revealed a truth far uglier. And then there was poor Lucy Adams, whose husband's charm had masked a cruelty that ended in tragedy. Miss Marple had learned to trust her instincts, those quiet whispers that spoke louder than evidence. Reginald Hawthorne, with his too perfect manners, reminded her of those men. Men who wore their respectability like a cloak, hiding the darkness beneath. She set her cup down and rose, her stick tapping lightly on the wooden floor as she made her way toward the tea stall, where Clara was now pouring from a large urn. Miss Marple's approach was deliberate, her smile as gentle as a grandmother's, though her eyes missed nothing. "Good evening, Mrs. Hawthorne," she said, her voice soft but clear. "What a lovely spread you've put together." "The village is lucky to have your talents," Clara started, nearly spilling the tea. "Oh, Miss Marple." "Thank you, that's very kind." Her voice was high, brittle, like glass on the verge of cracking. She glanced over her shoulder where Reginald was now deep in conversation with Colonel Bantry, his laughter loud and hearty. "It's just a few cakes and things. Nothing special." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said, leaning closer, her tone conspiratorial. "It takes a great deal of care to make things look effortless. I dare say you've been working hard to settle into Rose Cottage, too. New homes can be such a challenge." She watched Clara's face closely, noting the flicker of unease, the way her fingers tightened around the teapot's handle. "Oh yes, it's been a lot," Clara said, her eyes darting to the side. "But Reginald's been wonderful. He's so good at organizing everything." Her words were rehearsed as if recited from a script, and Miss Marple's heart sank. She had heard such words before from women who felt compelled to praise their husbands even as they trembled in their presence. Before Miss Marple could press further, Mrs. Bantry swept over, her crimson hat bobbing like a buoy. Jane, you must try one of Clara's fruitcakes. They're divine." She turned to Clara, her voice booming. "You and Reginald make such a charming couple, quite the addition to Saint Mary Mead." Clara's smile wavered, but she nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Bantry. We're very happy here." The words were hollow, and Miss Marple's keen ears caught the strain beneath them. She made a mental note. Clara was not merely nervous, she was afraid. As Mrs. Bantry chattered on, Miss Marple excused herself and moved toward the tombola stall, where she could observe the hawthorns from a distance. Reginald had now joined Clara at the tea stall, his arm around her waist, his smile as bright as the fairy lights strung above. To the villagers they were the picture of marital bliss. But Miss Marple saw the truth in the small things. The way Clara's shoulders stiffened at his touch, the way her eyes avoided his, the way his hand lingered just a fraction too long, as if to remind her of his presence. The evening wore on, and Miss Marple circulated through the crowd, her ears attuned to the village gossip. She learned that Reginald was a retired accountant, formerly of London, with a reputation for shrewdness. Clara, it seemed, had been a governess before their marriage, a quiet woman with no family to speak of. A bit of a mystery, that one, Mrs. Price confided over a cup of mulled wine. Always so jumpy, poor dear. But then, Mr. Hawthorne's such a commanding sort, I expect she's just shy. Miss Marple nodded politely, but her mind was elsewhere. Shyness did not account for the fear in Clara's eyes, nor for the way Reginald watched her. His gaze not that of a loving husband, but of a man guarding a secret. She thought of the footprints in the snow, the bulge in Reginald's coat pocket, the too tight scarf around Clara's neck. Each detail was a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to weave. As the bazaar drew to a close, Miss Marple lingered near the coat rack, where villagers were bundling up against the cold. She overheard a snippet of conversation between Reginald and Mr. Clement, the vicar, who was thanking him for a generous donation to the church fund. "Anything for the community," Reginald said, his voice smooth as silk. "Clara and I want to make Saint Mary Mead our home for good." His words were warm, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes flicked toward Clara, who was clearing the tea stall, her movements hurried and anxious. Back at Dane Mead Cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched as she mulled over the evening. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the room, and the wind outside rattled the windows. She closed her eyes, letting the pieces of the puzzle shift in her mind. Reginald's charm was a facade, she was certain, but a facade for what? Greed? Jealousy? Or something colder, more calculated? She thought of Clara. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Wife. The snow fell thicker now in St. Mary Mead, blanketing the village in a hush that seemed to muffle even the whispers of scandal. 2 days had passed since the Christmas bazaar, and the festive fervor had given way to a quieter anticipation as families prepared for the holiday. Miss Jane Marple, however, found no peace in the season's calm. Her mind was restless, her instincts sharpened by the certainty that something sinister had taken root in the Hawthorne household. The image of Clara Hawthorne's trembling hands and fearful eyes haunted her, as did the cold precision of Reginald Hawthorne's smile. And now the village was abuzz with a new development. Clara Hawthorne had vanished. The news broke on a crisp Tuesday morning when Mrs. Price, the postmistress, mentioned at the village shop that Clara had not been seen since Sunday evening. By noon, the tidbit had spread like frost across a window pane, and by tea-time it was the sole topic of conversation at the Blue Boar Inn. Reginald Hawthorne, ever composed, had explained to anyone who asked that Clara had taken an impromptu trip to London to visit her sister, prompted by a sudden family emergency. She left early Monday, he told Colonel Bantry over a pint, his voice tinged with just the right amount of concern. I'm expecting her back by Christmas Eve, but you know how sisters are. Once they start talking, there's no stopping them. The villagers nodded sympathetically, their trust in Reginald's charm unshaken. But Miss Marple, sipping tea in her parlor as she listened to her maid, Lily, relay the gossip, was not so easily swayed. She had met Clara's type before, women tethered to men whose control was as subtle as it was absolute. Clara's supposed trip to London struck her as a fiction too convenient by half. A woman as nervous as Clara would not depart so suddenly, leaving behind her duties at the bazaar and her new home in Rose Cottage. And there was something else, a detail that gnawed at Miss Marple's mind. The laundry basket she had glimpsed in the Hawthorne parlor during her visit the previous day. It had been an unremarkable call, ostensibly to deliver a Christmas pudding as a neighborly gesture. Reginald had welcomed her with his usual polish, offering tea and making small talk about the weather. But Miss Marple's eyes had wandered, as they always did, taking in the details of the room. The polished oak table, the neatly arranged bookshelves, the fire burning low in the grate. And there in the corner stood a large wicker laundry basket, its lid slightly askew as if it had been recently disturbed. It was an odd place for such an item, far from the scullery or upstairs bedrooms where laundry was typically kept. Reginald had followed her gaze, his smile tightening, and he had quickly steered the conversation to the village's Christmas plans. Miss Marple had left soon after, but the basket lingered in her thoughts, a puzzle piece that refused to fit. Now, with Clara's disappearance, the talk of Saint Mary Mead, Miss Marple resolved to act. She donned her sturdiest boots and a thick woolen coat, her stick in hand, and set out for the village post office. The snow crunched underfoot, and the air was sharp with the promise of more to come. At the post office, Mrs. Price was in her element, dispensing stamps and gossip with equal enthusiasm. "Poor Mr. Hawthorne," she said, leaning over the counter as Miss Marple inquired about the day's mail. "He's been ever so worried about Clara. Says she sent a telegram to her sister, but you know how unreliable those London lines are." Miss Marple's smile was placid, but her mind was racing. "A telegram, you say?" How thoughtful of her to let her sister know. She paused, adjusting her gloves. "I don't suppose you saw it yourself, Mrs. Price. I know how diligent you are with the village's messages." Mrs. Price flushed with pride, then shook her head. "No, Miss Marple, I didn't. Mr. Hawthorne mentioned it when he came in yesterday, but we've had no telegrams from Rose Cottage this week. Mind you, Clara might have sent it from the station." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone as mild as milk. But her suspicions hardened. No telegram, no sighting of Clara at the station. Reginald's story was unraveling thread by thread. She thanked Mrs. Price and stepped back into the cold, her mind turning to the next piece of her inquiry. Her walk took her past Rose Cottage, its windows dark and its chimney smokeless. The garden gate creaked as she paused to survey the scene. The snow around the cottage was undisturbed, save for a single set of footprints leading from the back door to a small shed at the garden's edge. The prints were deep, as if made by someone carrying a heavy load, and they stopped abruptly at the shed's locked door. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She recalled the laundry basket, its odd placement, and the way Reginald's eyes had flickered toward it. Could Clara's body be hidden inside, awaiting a moment when suspicion had faded? The thought was grim, but Miss Marple had seen too much of human nature to dismiss it. She considered approaching the shed directly, but thought better of it. Reginald was no fool. He would be watching for prying eyes. Instead, she continued her walk, looping back toward the village hall, where preparations for the Christmas Eve carol service were underway. There she found Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, arranging hymnals with her usual brisk efficiency. Miss Marple greeted her warmly, steering the conversation toward the Hawthorns. "Such a pity about Clara," she said, her voice laced with concern. "I do hope she's safe in London. It's not like her to leave so suddenly, is it?" Mrs. Clement frowned, setting down a stack of hymnals. "I thought it odd myself, Jane." Clara was so keen to help with the carol service. She promised to bring her mother's recipe for mulled wine, and now to vanish without a word. She shook her head. "Mr. Hawthorne says it was a family matter, but I can't help wondering." She seemed so fragile at the bazaar. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy, though her mind was cataloging every word. "Fragile, yes, I noticed that too, and Mr. Hawthorne, so attentive yet—" She let the sentence trail off, inviting Mrs. Clement to fill the silence. "Yet a bit overbearing, don't you think?" Mrs. Clement said, lowering her voice. "I saw him at the bazaar, always hovering over her." Poor Clara could hardly pour a cup of tea without him watching. I thought she looked frightened, but I told myself it was just her nerves. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone non-committal. But her certainty grew. Clara's fear was not imagined, nor was it mere nerves. She thanked Mrs. Clement and made her way home, her stick tapping a steady rhythm against the icy path. The village was quiet now, the snow falling in soft, relentless flakes, and Miss Marple's thoughts were as sharp as the winter air. Back at Danemead Cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting untouched as she pieced together the fragments of her observations. Clara's absence, Reginald's glib explanation, the laundry basket, the footprints, the locked shed, all pointed to a grim conclusion. Clara was not in London. She was dead, and Reginald had hidden her body to delay discovery. The laundry basket, she suspected, had been a temporary hiding place, its wicker bulk large enough to conceal a small, fragile woman like Clara. But why move her to the shed? And how long did Reginald plan to keep up the charade? Miss Marple's mind turned to the village's rhythms, the events that might provide cover for a man like Reginald. The Boxing Day bonfire loomed large in her thoughts, a towering pile of wood and debris behind the village hall, ready to be set alight in a festive blaze. It would be the perfect opportunity to destroy evidence, to reduce Clara's body to ashes before suspicion could take root. The thought chilled her more than the snow outside, but it also spurred her resolve. She would need evidence, something tangible to present to Constable Harris, who, though young, was eager to prove himself. That evening, her nephew Raymond West arrived for tea, his city sophistication at odds with the cozy simplicity of her parlor. Over scones and jam, Miss Marple shared her suspicions, careful to frame them as idle musings. "Reginald Hawthorne," she said, stirring her tea, "has the air of a man with something to hide. I fear for Clara, Raymond. I fear she's come to harm." Raymond laughed, his skepticism as predictable as the ticking of the mantel clock. "Aunt Jane, you're spinning mysteries out of thin air. Clara's probably sipping tea with her sister as we speak. Hawthorne's a bit stiff, I'll grant you, but a murderer? Come now." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes steady. "You may be right, dear. But I've seen men like him before, men who smile while they plan. If Clara is safe, I'll be glad to be wrong. But if she isn't—" She left the sentence unfinished, her gaze drifting to the fire. Raymond shook his head, amused, but Miss Marple was undeterred. She had no proof, only the weight of her instincts. But instincts had served her well before. She would watch and wait, and when the moment came, she would act. As the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the shed, the footprints, the basket. The pieces were there, waiting to be assembled. Clara Hawthorne was gone, but not forgotten. Not while Jane Marple lived in St. Mary Mead. The snow might cover the village's secrets, but Miss Marple would uncover them, one careful step at a time. Chapter 4. The clue in the snow. The snow fell in earnest now, cloaking St. Mary Mead in a silent shroud that muffled the village's usual hum. The lanes, once bustling with children and shoppers, were nearly deserted, save for the occasional figure hurrying through the cold. Miss Jane Marple, undaunted by the weather, ventured out each morning, her stick tapping a steady rhythm against the icy paths. Her walks were not aimless. They were deliberate, a quiet campaign to unravel the mystery of Clara Hawthorne's disappearance. 3 days had passed since the Christmas bazaar, and Clara's absence weighed heavily on the village, though most accepted Reginald Hawthorne's tale of a London visit without question. Miss Marple, however, saw through the polished veneer of his story, her instinct sharpened by a lifetime of observing the subtle cracks in human facades. Her suspicions had crystallized around the wicker laundry basket in the Hawthorne parlor and the deep footprints leading to the locked shed behind Rose Cottage. These were not mere oddities. They were signposts to a darker truth. Clara was not in London, Miss Marple was certain. She was dead, her body concealed by her husband to buy time. But certainty was not evidence, and evidence was what she needed to stir the sluggish machinery of justice. As she walked the village lanes, her eyes scanned the snow for clues, her mind piecing together the fragments of what she had seen and heard. On this particular morning, with the sky a heavy gray and the air sharp with frost, Miss Marple's path took her past Rose Cottage. The house stood silent, its curtains drawn, its chimney cold. She paused at the garden gate, her breath clouding in the chill air. The footprints she had noticed 2 days prior were still visible, though softened by fresh snow. They led from the back door to the shed, their depth suggesting a heavy burden. Too heavy, she thought, for a man carrying nothing more than firewood or tools. The shed itself was unremarkable, its wooden walls weathered and its padlock glinting dully in the weak light. Yet it held her attention, a locked box that might contain the key to Clara's fate. Miss Marple adjusted her scarf and moved closer, careful to keep to the path where her own footprints would blend with those of other passers-by. She had no intention of alerting Reginald to her interest, for he was a watchful man, his charm a mask for calculation. As she studied the shed, she noted a faint disturbance in the snow near its base, a scuff mark, as if something had been dragged or dropped. Her heart quickened. Could Reginald have moved Clara's body from the laundry basket to the shed under cover of darkness? The thought was grim, but it fit the pattern she had begun to discern. She turned back toward the village, her mind racing. The shed was locked, and any attempt to investigate further would require assistance, perhaps from Constable Harris, though she would need more than a hunch to persuade him. For now, she would gather what information she could through subtler means. Her destination was the Blue Boar Inn, where the village's gossip flowed as freely as the ale. There she might learn something new about Reginald's movements or Clara's supposed trip. The inn was warm and crowded, its low beams festooned with holly and ivy. Miss Marple settled into a corner table, her presence unremarkable among the regulars. She ordered a pot of tea and listened as the conversation swirled around her. The topic, predictably, was Clara Hawthorne. "Such a shame she missed the carol practice," said Mrs. Weatherby, the butcher's wife, as she sipped her stout. "She was so keen to sing this year." "Off to London, I hear," replied Mr. Turville, the innkeeper, polishing a glass. "Mr. Hawthorne says it was sudden, but she'll be back for Christmas. Family's family, after all." Miss Marple's lips pursed. She had already confirmed through Mrs. Price that no telegram had been sent from Rose Cottage, and the station master, Mr. Gibbs, had seen no sign of Clara on Monday's train. Reginald's story was a house of cards, flimsy and ready to collapse. She sipped her tea, her ears attuned to a quieter exchange at the bar where young Tommy Pierce, the delivery boy, was speaking to Mr. Turville. "I was at Rose Cottage Monday night delivering a parcel," Tommy said, his voice low but clear. "Mr. Hawthorne was in a right state, pacing about. I saw him carrying a big basket out back like he was in a hurry. Thought it was odd, it being so late." Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her cup. A basket, likely the laundry basket she had seen in the parlor. Her suspicion that it had been used to conceal Clara's body grew stronger. She made a mental note to speak to Tommy later, perhaps with a shilling to loosen his tongue. For now, she filed the information away, her mind turning to the shed and its locked door. As she left the inn, the snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Reginald Hawthorne himself, striding down the lane toward the village hall. His overcoat was buttoned tightly, his hat pulled low, and his pace was brisk as if he had somewhere to be. She followed at a discreet distance, her stick muffled by the snow. Reginald entered the hall, where preparations for the Christmas Eve carol service were in full swing. Miss Marple slipped in behind him, her presence unnoticed amid the bustle of volunteers. Inside, Reginald was speaking to Mrs. Clement, his manner as smooth as ever. "I'll be sure to help with the bonfire on Boxing Day," he said, his voice carrying a note of cheerful duty. "Clara would want me to keep busy. While she's away," Mrs. Clement nodded, her face sympathetic, but Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The bonfire, a towering pile of wood and debris behind the hall, was the perfect place to dispose of evidence. She had suspected as much, but hearing Reginald mention it confirmed her fears. He was planning to destroy Clara's body in the blaze, erasing the last trace of his crime. Miss Marple lingered near the hymnals, pretending to inspect them as she watched Reginald. His hands, she noted, were immaculate, the nails neatly trimmed with no sign of the dirt or scratches one might expect from a man who had been hauling heavy loads in the snow. It was a small detail, but telling. A man who had killed his wife and hidden her body would be careful to keep his hands clean both literally and figuratively. She recalled a case from years ago when a farmer's wife had disappeared only to be found buried in a field, her husband's pristine hands betraying his attempt to distance himself from the act. Reginald, she suspected, was cut from the same cloth. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple made her way to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was sorting donations for the church's Christmas charity. She greeted Miss Marple warmly, offering tea and a seat by the fire. "Such a dreadful business about Clara," Mrs. Clement said, pouring from a chipped teapot. "I do hope she's all right in London." "Mr. Hawthorne seems so worried, but he's putting on a brave face." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. "He's a strong man, no doubt. But I wonder, my dear, if Clara seemed herself before she left. You saw her at the bazaar. Did anything strike you as unusual?" Mrs. Clement hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Well, now that you mention it, she was awfully quiet. More so than usual. And when Reginald spoke to her, she seemed, I don't know, almost afraid. I thought it was just her nerves, but now I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. "It's often the small things that tell us the most," she said, her voice soft. "I do hope Clara is safe, but I can't help feeling uneasy. A sudden trip with no word to anyone. It's not like her, is it?" Mrs. Clement shook her head, her expression troubled. "No, it isn't. I tried to call on her Sunday evening, you know, to discuss the carol service, but Reginald said she was resting. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" Her voice trailed off, and Miss Marple patted her hand. "Don't distress yourself, my dear. We'll know more soon, I'm sure." But as she spoke, her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the timeline. Clara had been seen at the bazaar on Sunday, but by Monday she was gone, with only Reginald's word to account for her whereabouts. The basket, the footprints, the shed, the bonfire, all pointed to a plan as cold and deliberate as the winter snow. As she left the vicarage, the sky darkened and the snow fell heavier, obscuring the village in a veil of white. Miss Marple's thoughts were clear, however, her resolve unshaken. She would need to act quickly before the bonfire could consume the truth. Constable Harris would be her next step, but she would need to tread carefully, presenting her suspicions as a concerned citizen's observations rather than an accusation. The shed held the key, she was certain, and she would find a way to open it before Reginald's plan could come to fruition. Back at Danemead Cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched as she stared into the flames. The village clock chimed 6, its notes muffled by the snow. Miss Marple's mind was a tapestry of details, each thread carefully woven. Clara's fear, Reginald's control, the basket, the footprints, the shed, the bonfire. She thought of another case long ago when a young wife had vanished, her husband's story accepted until a single clue, a bloodied handkerchief in a coal scuttle, had unraveled his lies. Clara's fate, she feared, was no different, but Miss Marple would not let it go unanswered. The snow continued to fall, blanketing Saint Mary Mead in silence, but Miss Marple's heart was anything but quiet. She would watch and wait, and when the moment came, she would act. The truth, like the snow, could not be hidden forever. Not while Jane Marple walked the lanes of Saint Mary Mead. Chapter 5. The Christmas Eve Revelation. The eve of Christmas descended upon Saint Mary Mead with a quiet grandeur, the village aglow with candlelight and the soft strains of carols drifting through the frosted air. The church, its ancient stones dusted with snow, stood as the heart of the evening's festivities, drawing villagers in their Sunday best to sing and pray beneath its vaulted ceiling. Yet for Miss Jane Marple, seated in a pew near the back, her hymn book unopened, the season's joy was overshadowed by a growing certainty of tragedy. Clara Hawthorne's absence, now 4 days old, hung over her like a storm cloud, and the pieces of the puzzle, Reginald's polished lies, the laundry basket, the footprints to the shed, had begun to form a grim picture. Tonight, she resolved, she would find the final clue to unravel the mystery. The church was warm and crowded, the pews filled with familiar faces. Mrs. Bantry, her crimson hat replaced by a more somber velvet one. Dr. Haydock nodding to the rhythm of Hark, the herald angels sing. And young Tommy Pierce fidgeting beside his mother. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were fixed on Reginald Hawthorne, who stood near the front, his head bowed in apparent reverence. His dark overcoat was neatly pressed, his face a mask of solemnity, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers twitched at his sides, a nervous tic that betrayed his composure. He was playing the part of the worried husband to perfection, but she saw through the act, her instincts honed by years of observing the subtle tells of guilt. The service progressed, the vicar's voice rising and falling in a sermon about goodwill and redemption. Miss Marple's thoughts, however, were elsewhere, piecing together the timeline of Clara's disappearance. Sunday evening, Clara had been at the bazaar, her fear palpable. By Monday, she was gone, with only Reginald's story of a London trip to explain her absence. The laundry basket in the parlor, the deep footprints to the shed, and Tommy Pierce's tale of seeing Reginald carry a basket late at night, all pointed to a chilling conclusion. Clara was dead, her body hidden to delay suspicion. The Boxing Day bonfire, now only 2 days away, loomed as the final piece of Reginald's plan, a blaze that could erase the evidence of his crime. As the choir began "O Little Town of Bethlehem," Miss Marple slipped out of the church, her departure unnoticed amid the singing. The night was bitterly cold, the snow falling in soft, relentless flakes that blurred the outlines of the village. She pulled her shawl tighter and made her way toward Rose Cottage, her stick sinking into the snow with each step. Her plan was risky but necessary. She needed to confirm her suspicions about the shed before approaching Constable Harris. If Clara's body was indeed hidden there, she could not afford to wait until Reginald made his next move. The lane to Rose Cottage was deserted, the village's attention fixed on the church. The cottage itself was dark, its windows like blank eyes staring into the night. Miss Marple approached the garden gate, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. The footprints to the shed were still visible, though nearly obscured by fresh snow. She moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, her eyes scanning for any sign of Reginald's return. The shed stood at the garden's edge, its padlock glinting faintly in the moonlight. She tested the door, knowing it would be locked, but her attention was drawn to the scuff marks at the base where the snow was disturbed as if something heavy had been dragged inside. She paused, her breath clouding in the cold air. The shed was too small for a thorough search without breaking in, and that was a step too far even for her. But as she turned to leave, a glint in the snow caught her eye, a small metallic object half buried near the shed's corner. She knelt, ignoring the chill seeping through her coat, and brushed the snow aside. It was a hairpin, delicate and silver, with a tiny pearl at one end. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She had seen Clara wear such a pin at the bazaar, securing her auburn hair. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, but to Miss Marple it was a beacon in the dark. Clara had been here, or her body had, and this hairpin was proof. She tucked the pin into her glove, her mind racing. The hairpin alone was not enough to convince Constable Harris, but it strengthened her resolve. She needed to act before the bonfire, before Reginald could destroy the evidence. As she stood, a faint sound reached her ears, the crunch of footsteps in the snow. She froze, pressing herself against the shed's wall. A figure emerged from the lane, moving swiftly toward the cottage. It was Reginald, his coat flapping as he hurried to the back door. Miss Marple held her breath, her heart pounding. Had he seen her? She waited motionless until the door closed behind him, the cottage swallowing him into its darkness. She slipped away, her steps careful but quick, the hairpin a weighty secret in her glove. Back at Danemead Cottage, she settled by the fire, her mind a whirl of calculations. The hairpin placed Clara at the shed, but it was not enough to prove murder. She needed to see inside, to confirm that the laundry basket, or Clara herself, was there, but Reginald was vigilant and the shed was locked. She would need an ally, someone with authority to act without arousing suspicion. The village clock chimed 10, its notes faint through the snow. Miss Marple rose and penned a note to Constable Harris, her handwriting precise despite the late hour. She requested his presence at Danemead Cottage the following morning, framing her concern as that of a worried neighbor. "I fear for Mrs. Hawthorne's safety," she wrote, "and there are certain matters at Rose Cottage that may warrant your attention." She sealed the note and set it aside for Lily to deliver at first light. Harris was young and eager, but he respected her judgment, having seen her unravel smaller village mysteries in the past. She hoped he would listen now. As the fire burned low, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the bonfire. Reginald's mention of it at the village hall had been too deliberate, too calculated. She recalled a case from her youth when a man had burned his wife's belongings in a garden fire to hide his crime, only to be undone by a single button found in the ashes. Reginald, she suspected, was planning something similar but on a grander scale. The bonfire would be a public event attended by the entire village, the perfect cover for disposing of a body. She shivered not from the cold but from the clarity of her vision. Clara's fate hung in the balance and time was running out. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned bright and cold, the snow sparkling under a rare sun. Miss Marple dressed carefully, her mind sharp despite a restless night. Constable Harris arrived promptly at 9, his uniform crisp and his expression earnest. Over tea, she laid out her concerns, careful to avoid accusations. "I've noticed some odd things at Rose Cottage," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Footprints in the snow, leading to a locked shed. And this hairpin found near it, which I believe belongs to Mrs. Hawthorne." She produced the pin, its pearl catching the light. Harris examined it, his brow furrowing. "It's a fine piece, Miss Marple, but it could belong to anyone. And footprints, well, it's been snowing for days. Are you sure there's cause for worry?" "I'm an old woman, Constable," she said, her smile disarming, "and perhaps I see trouble where there is none. But Mrs. Hawthorne's sudden departure with no word to anyone strikes me as strange. And those footprints, they were deep, as if someone carried a heavy load. I'd feel better if you could take a look just to set my mind at ease." Harris nodded, his youthful confidence tempered by respect for her intuition. "I'll stop by Rose Cottage this afternoon, Miss Marple. Mr. Hawthorne's been cooperative, but it won't hurt to ask a few questions." Miss Marple thanked him, her heart lighter but her resolve unbroken. As Harris left, she turned her attention to the day's events. The village would gather for Christmas lunch at the hall, followed by games and a children's pageant. Reginald would likely be there, playing the grieving husband, but Miss Marple suspected he would use the distraction to prepare for the bonfire. She would attend the lunch, keeping him in her sights, and wait for Harris to report back. The lunch was a lively affair, the hall filled with laughter and the clink of glasses. Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, who was full of gossip about the vicar's new sermon. Reginald was present, his charm undimmed as he handed out slices of turkey to the children. But Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to the windows, as if expecting someone or something. She excused herself early, claiming fatigue, and made her way to the back of the hall where the bonfire pile loomed in the snow. It was larger now, stacked with branches and old furniture, a pyre waiting for its moment. She circled it slowly, her stick probing the snow for anything out of place, but found nothing. Still, her certainty grew. The bonfire was Reginald's endgame. As she returned to Danemead Cottage, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. Miss Marple sat by her window, the hairpin on the table beside her, its pearl a silent accusation. She thought of Clara, her fragile frame and fearful eyes, and of the women she had known who had suffered at the hands of men like Reginald. The clock ticked on, each second bringing the bonfire closer. Miss Marple's hands were still, her knitting forgotten, as she waited for Harris's report. The truth was near. She could feel it, as close as the snow against the glass. And when it came, she would be ready. Chapter 6. The unraveling Christmas morning in St. Mary Mead dawned with a crystalline brilliance, the snow glittering under a pale sun that offered little warmth. The village stirred slowly, its inhabitants lingering over breakfasts of mince pies and tea, their thoughts turned to the day's festivities. But for Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlor at Danemead Cottage, the holiday held no cheer. Her mind was a whirl of grim certainty. Her suspicions about Reginald Hawthorne and the fate of his wife Clara now sharpened to a razor's edge. The hairpin she had found near the shed, the deep footprints in the snow, the misplaced laundry basket, all pointed to a truth she could no longer ignore. Clara was dead, and Reginald had hidden her body, likely in the locked shed behind Rose Cottage. awaiting the Boxing Day bonfire to erase his crime. Today, she resolved, would be the day the truth came to light. Miss Marple had spent the night refining her plan, her thoughts as precise as the stitches in the scarf that lay forgotten in her knitting basket. Constable Harris, young but earnest, had promised to visit Rose Cottage that afternoon, prompted by her carefully worded note and the pearl-tipped hairpin she had presented as a clue. She had framed her concerns as those of a worried neighbor, avoiding any direct accusation, but she knew Harris's curiosity would be piqued. The challenge now was timing. Reginald was a cautious man, and the village's Christmas festivities would provide him cover to act. The bonfire, stacked high with wood and debris behind the village hall, loomed as his final opportunity to destroy evidence. Miss Marple needed to ensure he was caught before the flames could consume the truth. She dressed with care, choosing a dark woolen coat and a hat pinned securely against the wind. Her stick, a faithful companion, tapped lightly as she stepped into the snow, her destination the village hall, where the Christmas lunch would draw the entire community. Reginald would be there, she was certain, playing the role of the bereaved husband, his charm a shield against suspicion. But Miss Marple knew that even the most polished facade could crack under pressure, and she intended to apply it. The hall was a riot of color and noise, its tables laden with roast turkey, plum pudding, and bowls of steaming vegetables. Children darted between chairs, their laughter mingling with the clink of glasses and the hum of conversation. Miss Marple took a seat near Mrs. Bantry, whose festive spirit was undimmed by the morning's chill. "Jane, you must try the cranberry sauce," Mrs. Bantry said, her voice booming over the din. "Mrs. Clement swears it's her grandmother's recipe, but I suspect she's added a dash of something modern." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning the room. Reginald Hawthorne stood near the serving table, carving slices of turkey with a practiced hand, his smile as bright as the tinsel overhead. To the villagers, he was a man bearing up bravely under worry for his wife. But Miss Marple saw the tension in his posture, the way his gaze flicked toward the door as if expecting an interruption. She noted, too, the absence of dirt on his hands, a detail that had struck her before. A man who had moved a body, even one as slight as Clara's, would surely bear some mark of the effort, yet Reginald's fingers were as clean as a surgeon's. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes to her practiced eye. As the lunch progressed, Miss Marple engaged Mrs. Bantry in conversation, steering it toward the Hawthorns. "I do hope Clara is enjoying her time in London," she said, her tone light. "It's so unlike her to leave so suddenly, don't you think?" Mrs. Bantry frowned, spooning pudding onto her plate. "I thought it odd too, Jane. She was so keen to help with the carol service, and then, poof, off to London without a word. I saw Reginald this morning and he seemed cheerful enough, but there's something, I don't know, strained about him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern. "Strained, yes. I suppose worry can do that to a man. Still, I'd feel better if we knew Clara was safe." She let the comment hang, planting a seed of doubt in Mrs. Bantry's mind. The village was a web of gossip, and a single thread could unravel Reginald's carefully woven story. As the meal wound down, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. She stepped outside, the snow crunching under her boots, and made her way to the back of the hall. where the bonfire pile loomed like a silent giant. The stack had grown since her last visit, its branches and old furniture dusted with snow. She circled it slowly, her stick probing the ground for anything out of place. A scrap of fabric, a trace of blood, anything that might link the pile to Clara. But the snow was pristine, and the pile itself was too dense to search without drawing attention. She sighed, her breath clouding in the cold. The bonfire was Reginald's endgame, she was certain, but she needed proof to stop him. Returning to the hall, she spotted Constable Harris entering, his uniform slightly rumpled from the morning's duties. She approached him with a smile, her manner as unassuming as ever. "Constable, how good to see you. I trust you've had a chance to visit Rose Cottage." Harris nodded, his expression serious. "I did, Miss Marple, just before lunch." Mr. Hawthorne was polite enough, but he seemed a bit on edge. "I asked to look around as you suggested, and he showed me the house. Nothing seemed out of sorts but that shed in the garden. He was quick to say it's just for tools and such. Locked tight, though." I didn't press, not without a reason. Miss Marple's heart sank, but she kept her smile steady. "Of course, you must be cautious. But that hairpin I gave you, did you mention it to him?" "Not yet," Harris admitted. "I thought it best to hold off until I had more to go on. But I'll keep an eye on him, Miss Marple. If there's anything amiss, I'll find it." She thanked him, her mind racing. Harris was thorough, but he lacked the authority to force his way into the shed without cause. She would need to provide that cause, and quickly. As she returned to her seat, she noticed Reginald slipping out of the hall, his coat slung over his arm. Her instincts flared. He was moving now, perhaps to check the shed or prepare for the bonfire. She could not follow him without being seen, but she could act. After lunch, as the villagers dispersed to their homes, Miss Marple made her way to Rose Cottage, her heart pounding but her step steady. The lane was quiet, the snow muffling all sound. She approached the garden gate, her eyes fixed on the shed. The footprints were still there, though nearly buried by fresh snow. She glanced at the cottage, its windows dark, and made a decision. She would not break into the shed, that was a job for Harris. But she could ensure Reginald had no chance to act before the constable returned. She knocked on the cottage door, her pretext ready, a lost scarf from the bazaar perhaps left in the parlor. Reginald answered, his smile tight but courteous. "Miss Marple, what a pleasant surprise. Come in out of the cold." She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the room. The laundry basket was gone, its absence as telling as its presence had been. "I'm so sorry to bother you on Christmas," she said, her voice warm. "I seem to have misplaced my scarf at the bazaar, and I thought it might have been left here. Might I have a look?" Reginald hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Of course," he said, his tone smooth. "But I'm afraid we've tidied everything away." "Perhaps it's at the hall?" Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on the corner where the basket had stood. "Perhaps. And how is Clara? Any word from London?" His smile faltered just for a moment. "She's well, I'm sure. Her sister's keeping her busy. I expect her back tomorrow." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her expression bland. "How lovely. I mustn't keep you then." She turned to leave, then paused as if struck by a thought. "Oh, and that shed in your garden, it looks so sturdy. I've been meaning to get one for my own tools. Might I see it?" Just to get an idea, Reginald's face tightened. his hand gripping the doorframe. "It's nothing special, Miss Marple. Just old tools and such. I'd rather not disturb it now. It's locked and the key's upstairs." "Of course," she said, her smile disarming. But as she left, she knew she had rattled him. His refusal to show the shed was as good as a confession. She hurried back to the village, her stick tapping urgently, and found Constable Harris at the station finishing a report. "Constable," she said, her voice low but firm, "I've just been to Rose Cottage. Mr. Hawthorne is hiding something, I'm certain. That shed, you must look inside. I believe Clara may be there, or what's left of her." Harris's eyes widened, but he nodded. "I'll go now, Miss Marple. If you're right, we can't wait." Together they returned to Rose Cottage, Harris's stride purposeful, Miss Marple's slower but determined. Reginald was waiting at the door, his face pale but composed. "Constable, Miss Marple, what's this about?" "Just a routine check, Mr. Hawthorne," Harris said, his tone calm but authoritative. "I'd like to see inside that shed, if you don't mind." Reginald's jaw tightened, but he produced the key, his hand steady. "Of course. It's just tools, as I said." They followed him to the shed, the snow crunching underfoot. Harris unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a dim interior cluttered with rakes and shovels. In the corner, covered by a tarp, was the wicker laundry basket. Miss Marple's breath caught, but she said nothing. Harris lifted the tarp, then the basket's lid, and there, curled inside, was Clara Hawthorne, her face pale and lifeless, her auburn hair tangled around the pearl-tipped pin. Reginald's composure shattered. I can explain," he stammered, but Harris was already cuffing him, his voice steady as he read the charges. At the station, under pressure, Reginald confessed. A quarrel over money had turned violent, and in a moment of rage he had struck Clara, killing her. The basket had been a desperate hiding place, the shed a temporary solution until the bonfire could destroy the evidence. As Harris led him away, Miss Marple stood in the snow, her heart heavy but her conscience clear. The truth had been uncovered, but at a cost. Clara was gone, her life snuffed out by a man she had trusted. The village would mourn, but it would heal, as it always did. Miss Marple turned toward home, the snow falling softly around her, a silent witness to her quiet triumph. Chapter 7. The Quiet Triumph. The snow fell gently over St. Mary Mead on Boxing Day, softening the edges of the village's cottages and lanes as if nature itself sought to soothe the wound left by Clara Hawthorne's tragic fate. The church bells rang out, their notes muffled but clear, calling the villagers to a morning service that carried a somber undertone. The revelation of Reginald Hawthorne's crime had rippled through the community like a stone dropped in a still pond, stirring whispers of shock and sorrow. Yet life in the village pressed on as it always did, with the resilience of those accustomed to weathering life's storms. For Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlor at Danemead Cottage, the resolution of the mystery brought no joy, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. Her knitting lay idle in her lap, the gray scarf a silent witness to the days of vigilance that had led to this moment. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room as Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts retracing the path that had led to Reginald's arrest. The hairpin found near the shed, the deep footprints in the snow, the misplaced laundry basket, and the looming threat of the Boxing Day bonfire had all pointed to a truth she had seen before the rest of the village. Clara was dead, and her husband was the architect of her demise. The confrontation at Rose Cottage the previous day, with Constable Harris uncovering Clara's body in the wicker basket, had been both a triumph and a tragedy. Reginald's confession, wrung from him under the weight of undeniable evidence, had laid bare the sordid details: a quarrel over money, a moment of rage, and a desperate attempt to conceal the crime. Miss Marple had watched as Harris led him away, his polished charm reduced to a hollow shell, his guilt exposed for all to see. Now, as the village grappled with the aftermath, Miss Marple prepared for a visit from her nephew, Raymond West, who had promised to join her for Boxing Day tea. She knew he would be eager to hear the full story, his writer's curiosity piqued by the drama that had unfolded in quiet St. Mary Mead. She arranged the tea tray with care, setting out scones and a jar of her own damson jam. But her mind was elsewhere, sifting through the lessons of the case. It was not the first time she had seen a man's charm mask a darker nature, nor would it be the last. Human nature, she reflected, was as predictable as it was complex, its patterns repeating across the years like the stitches in her knitting. The clock chimed 3 and Raymond arrived, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He shed his coat and scarf, settling into the armchair opposite her with a grin. "Aunt Jane, you've done it again," he said, his tone a mix of admiration and exasperation. "The whole village is talking about Hawthorne's arrest." "How did you know? I thought Clara was off in London, sipping tea with her sister." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "You give me too much credit, Raymond. I only noticed what was there to be seen. People are much the same, you know, whether in St. Mary Mead or London. A man who plans to kill his wife always gives himself away if you know where to look." Raymond leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But where did you look, Aunt Jane?" "I saw Hawthorne at the bazaar, all smiles and charm. I'd never have pegged him for a murderer." She set her cup down, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "It's the small things, dear." The way Clara flinched when he spoke to her, the way his smile never reached his eyes. And then there was the laundry basket. Such an odd thing to keep in the parlor, don't you think? I knew it was out of place, just as I knew those footprints to the shed were too deep for a man carrying nothing but tools. It's like a badly knitted sweater, Raymond. The stitches don't lie if you know how to read them." He shook his head, chuckling. "You make it sound so simple. But tell me the whole story. I want every detail." Miss Marple obliged, her voice soft but precise as she recounted the events of the past week. She began with her first sighting of the Hawthornes in the lane, Clara's nervous demeanor and Reginald's calculated control setting her instincts alight. She described the Christmas bazaar where Clara's trembling hands and Reginald's watchful gaze had deepened her suspicions. The news of Clara's disappearance, coupled with Reginald's flimsy story of a London trip, had spurred her to investigate further, leading to the discovery of the hairpin near the shed, a delicate clue that had confirmed Clara's presence there. The footprints, the basket, and Reginald's mention of the bonfire had all pointed to a plan to destroy evidence, a plan she had thwarted by enlisting Constable Harris and pressing for a search of the shed. As she spoke, Raymond listened intently, his skepticism giving way to awe. "And the hairpin," he said when she paused to sip her tea. "How did you know it was Clara's?" "I saw her wear it at the bazaar," Miss Marple replied. "A small thing but distinctive, with that pearl at the end. Women notice such things, Raymond. And when I found it near the shed, in the snow where no one had reason to be, I knew it was no coincidence. It was as if Clara herself were pointing the way." Raymond leaned back, his eyes wide. "It's like something out of one of my novels, only better." "But weren't you afraid, Aunt Jane? Confronting a man like Hawthorne, knowing what he'd done?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes held a glint of steel. "Fear is a luxury, dear. When you see a wrong that must be righted, you act, or you live with the knowledge that you did nothing. I've seen too many Claras in my time, women whose lives were snuffed out because no one noticed the signs. I couldn't let that happen again." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the village in a hush that seemed to honor Clara's memory. Miss Marple thought of the women she had known, their stories woven into the fabric of her memory. The vicar's wife who had fallen down the stairs, the maid who had vanished after a quarrel, the young bride whose husband's jealousy had turned deadly. Each had left a mark on her, a reminder that evil thrived in the shadows of respectability. Reginald Hawthorne was no different, his charm a mask for a heart as cold as the winter snow. Raymond reached for a scone, spreading jam with a thoughtful frown. "What will happen to him now? A trial, I suppose." "Oh, yes," Miss Marple said. "Constable Harris has his confession, and the evidence is clear. There'll be a trial and justice will be done. But it's Clara I think of, Raymond. She deserved better than to be hidden in a basket, her life ended by a man she trusted." Her nephew nodded, his expression somber. "You've saved the village from a monster, Aunt Jane. They ought to put up a statue of you," she laughed, a soft tinkling sound that belied the weight of her thoughts. "Nonsense, dear. I'm just an old woman who notices things. The village will go on, as it always does, and in time this will be just another story told over tea." But as she spoke, her eyes drifted to the window where the snow fell in silent waves. The village would indeed go on, its rhythms unbroken, but Clara's absence would linger, a quiet ache in the heart of Saint Mary Mead. Miss Marple had seen it before, the way tragedy left its mark like a shadow that never quite faded. She thought of the bonfire now unlit, its purpose thwarted by her vigilance. The villagers would gather around it tomorrow, unaware of the horror it might have concealed, and life would continue, its surface smooth once more. Raymond stayed until dusk, his questions answered but his curiosity unabated. As he left, promising to return for New Year's, Miss Marple stood at the door, watching his figure fade into the snow. The village was quiet now, the church bells silent, the lights in the cottages glowing like stars against the night. She returned to her parlor, settling by the fire with a sigh. Her knitting lay untouched, but her mind was active, turning over the lessons of the case. Human nature, she reflected, was a tapestry of light and dark, its patterns as familiar as they were unpredictable. Reginald Hawthorne had been undone by his own arrogance, his belief that he could outwit a village of simple folk. But St. Mary Mead was not so simple, not while Jane Marple lived within its bounds. She picked up her needles at last, the familiar rhythm soothing her thoughts. The scarf grew slowly, its stitches a testament to patience and care. Outside, the snow fell, covering the footprints, the shed, the secrets of Rose Cottage. But the truth, like the scarf, endured, woven from the small things that others overlooked. Miss Marple's eyes were soft but unyielding, her heart steady as she watched the fire. The Christmas tragedy was over, but others would come as they always did. And when they did, she would be ready, her quiet vigilance a beacon in the darkness of St. Mary Mead.